So I think this is time to go. Good morning, everyone. I am Commander Jérémy Bachelier, military fellow for the French Navy in the French Institute of International Relations, IFRI in short. I am your host today, and I am absolutely honored to moderate this roundtable about the naval rearmament with such a prestigious panel of experts. I would like to start with a short overview about the global situation. We have entered a new strategic cycle, which is characterized by the affirmation of new contesting powers, eager to revise the international order and by the increased risk of confrontation between states. In such a context, naval combat appears as a plausible hypothesis that could arise in the context of high-intensity conflict. The war in Ukraine recently completed this conviction with the naval blockade of the Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea, the firing of the caliber missiles from the sea, the capture of the Snake Island, or the sinking of the Moskva destroyer. So the return to this naval power strategy also finds its expression in a massive rearmament on a global scale, each country wishing to maintain a comparative advantage or at least limit its capacity gap. Over the period from 2008 to 2030, many states made a quantitative leap in terms of tonnage, with an important dynamism in the Indo-Pacific and in the Mediterranean regions, with an increase of 170% for Egypt, 166% for Israel, 138% for China, 120% for Algeria, 101% for South Korea, 40% for India and Malaysia, and 24% for Japan as examples. This increase in the format of the navies has also been accompanied by a qualitative move with the production of heavier and more versatile high-spectrum capacities, whether for warship, coastal defenses, naval aviation, or submarines. Beyond the increasing role of such capacities for strikes, reconnaissance, or targeting operations, there is also now the question for states of being able to control the seabed, including communication and energy transport, as recently underlined, as you know, during the Nord Stream event in the Baltic Sea. So now we have precisely around this virtual roundtable 3 experts regarding the naval rearmament. So please let me introduce them very shortly. First, Madame Catherine Warner, who is the director of the NATO Center for Maritime Research and Experimentation at La Spezia, Italy. Dr. Warner was previously the primary technical advisor to the director, operational test and evaluation within the US Office of the Secretary of Defense. Then Mr. Jean-François Ripoche, who is the Research, Technology and Innovation Director at the European Defense Agency, EDA. The EDA provides support to the member states and to the European Commission for the preparatory action on defense research, including its implementation and the research dimension of the European Defense Fund. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Nick Childs from the IISS, who is an expert of the maritime security and naval forces. He is responsible for the Institute's analysis of naval forces and maritime security and for the data on sea power capabilities published in the military balance. So I will now ask each panelist, please, to not exceed 15 to 20 minutes for each presentation in order to leave 25 to 30 minutes at the end for the Q&A session. I will also ask our audience, please, to ask the question in the dedicated questions box at the bottom right of your screen. And please specify for each of your questions if they are specifically addressed to one of our 3 experts or to all of them. So please let me start now with Madame Warner for a NATO perspective on the naval rearmament. Dr. Catherine Warner, if you are ready, the floor is now yours, please.
Thank you, Commander, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be here today representing NATO's research lab, CMRE, and to have the opportunity to share with you some of the new technologies the center has been developing for advancing the Alliance maritime capability and for maintaining the Alliance's technological edge. Just as background, for 60 years, the CMRE has been providing science and technology in support of NATO, and is currently a leading center for advances in autonomous unmanned vehicles for applications in warfare operations. Today, I'm going to give 3 separate examples of some of the advances that we're working on right now, both in anti-submarine warfare, mine countermeasures, and the impact of climate change. Let's see. Okay, so I just want to give one quick overview of sort of the strategic direction of our research. We, thanks to Commander Allied Command Transformation, the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, SACT, has provided his guidance and direction through the Maritime S&T program of work, has provided resources for the center to develop our core capabilities using autonomous systems for anti-submarine warfare, mine countermeasures, and maritime ISR. While also developing enabling capabilities such as environmental awareness, underwater communications, interoperability, and command and control. SACT's vision is for collaborative, persistent, secure, networked, autonomous, ASW, MCM, and maritime ISR capabilities. In 2021, ACT published the NATO Warfighting Capstone Concept and its implementation plan, which is set out in the Warfare Development Agenda. This builds on, updates, and expands SACT's vision for maritime S&T. And the NWCC is providing a foundation for warfare development up to 2040, and this is where the science and technology input is required the most. In addition, the NWCC being a vehicle for transformation and innovation, it is complemented by additional themes such as digital transformation and multi-domain operations. To support the development of MDO, ACT has produced an operational concept that was signed by both SHAPE and SACT recently. In the next few slides, I'm going to show some examples of the use of artificial intelligence and quantum sensing in autonomous anti-submarine warfare. So in this picture, I'm just showing a simple screen like a sonar operator on an ASW frigate would see. So each of the dots here in the background represent a ping. And if it's a warm color, that's a stronger ping, indicating possibility of a target. Now, even though all of these systems have a lot of signal processing and aids for the operator, there's still a lot of returns that an operator has to go and look after. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. So this is actually the perfect example of where artificial intelligence can be of help to the operator. So what we're doing is trying to develop types of artificial intelligence that could help the operator identify a submarine. One method is to train on an artificial target. That is, we take something like an echo repeater and under the water, and then we record the pings coming back from it, because that gives us the ping having gone through the underwater environment with the refraction and the reflections, and helps us collect a lot of data on what it would look like for an actual return. In another case, we actually train the algorithms on clutter. And I think it's very elegant because, we have so much more data on clutter than we do on the submarine, that we have enough to have some very good artificial intelligence models. And then we use sort of an anomaly detection scheme where, well, if it's not a submarine, or if it's not clutter, it must be a submarine. But really, to develop accurate and effective deep learning models, large good quality annotated data sets are needed. And although the center in operation over 60 years has a lot of data on submarines, it's maybe thousands of pings, whereas you need millions or 10 times that amount to have a good basis for doing some deep learning or machine learning. So to increase the data that are available, we're working on multiple projects. One is generating a high quality simulated submarine in which labeled and controlled data are integrated into real cluttered data. Another thing that we're working on is having active sonar metadata analysis STANAG, and that would allow to the facilitation of data sharing among all the nations that have this type of data and that are trying to do machine learning in this manner. Okay, so the next example I wanted to talk about is sensing. So the center has long been sort of at the forefront of developing new types of sensors. And right now, for the past couple of years, we've been looking at quantum sensors for doing passive ASW. So this sensor, as you can see in the top right, is a commercial off-the-shelf from a small firm, I believe in Princeton, New Jersey, but its size, weight, and power is what makes it so elegant, because a normal magnetic sensor is usually like 3 meters across. It's huge. So something this small, we can easily fit on the bottom node that I'm showing here on the left. So this is a bottom node that we built at the center. We built 2 of them. It has a variety of sensors on it in addition to this quantum magnetic sensor, including acoustic devices and other geomagnetic or very low frequency seismic sensors. But we can see already the signal returns I'm showing here is from 2 different bottom nodes and a ship passing by. So we're getting a very good return from these passive bottom nodes. So now I am going to give a couple of examples from mine countermeasures. We started research at the center in the late 1980s on mine hunting techniques and developing science and technology to find mines on the seafloor and discriminate them from harmless objects. In the early 2000s, we began experimenting with robotic systems. And since then, advances in robotics, sensors, and actual computing power on the platform has allowed us to demonstrate military utility in this area. So the center had developed a synthetic aperture sonar, which was a little bit different than the currently available side scan sonars, which were commercial off the shelf at the time. And we collaborated with industry to build this vehicle on the bottom right there. We call it the Muscle Autonomous Underwater Vehicle. And so it has similar to a side scan sonar, but with different processing and a little bit different aperture. We were able to do synthetic aperture sonar. And the very interesting thing about synthetic aperture sonar is, one, you have much greater range capability, you have very high resolution imagery, and the data are perfect for doing machine learning types of artificial intelligence. So in 2015, thanks to having many years of collection of these high resolution imagery, we started developing something called a convolutional neural network. And over the years, we ended up with 9 different aspects in this neural network, and it drastically improved the performance of the automatic target recognition, which is actually on the vehicle, including the processing of the SAS imagery, which is on the vehicle. So the chart here shows some targets or mine-like objects on the seafloor. The green boxes are from a typical machine learning algorithm, and then the red stars are showing what our convolutional neural network found, and those were the actual targets, and there were no false alarms. So we've demonstrated this in many NATO exercises and national mine exercises. And the next thing I wanted to show about our MCM, unfortunately, this is supposed to be a little GIF. It's not working in this slide, but basically the idea is that we have a squad of heterogeneous vehicles. So one of the vehicles is sort of doing this lawnmower pattern. This is the SAS. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So it's going back and forth down here, and every time it finds something, it tasks one of these other vehicles that's waiting off to the side that has a different type of sensor to come and take a closer look. And this ability for this squad to operate together to do a mission, I call it machines tasking machines. And this is really important because in the very near future, we're going to have a lot of autonomous vehicles out in front of our manned vehicles. And there's not going to be one human that can command each one of these vehicles. So they have to be able to talk to each other and optimize their mission without having a human to intervene. And we've demonstrated this capability, even incorporating other navies' vehicles into our squad just by, talking to them and saying, hey, I'm the muscle, you're a Remus, what can you do? So we've really optimized this capability and been able to demonstrate it even recently in Dynamic Messenger, which was the first autonomous maritime autonomous systems exercise by NATO that was recently completed in Portugal. And the final topic I want to talk to you about today is the impact of climate change on military operations. And starting with some basic facts about underwater warfare, if you're not already familiar, is that the standard technique for navigation, for communication, for ranging and detection is sound propagation, sonar, because none of the radio frequencies that are used above water for radars, communication, and navigation are available underwater. The electromagnetic radiation is absorbed by the water. So this is where it comes to climate change, because the heating of the water, the melting of the ice is changing fundamentally the properties, the salinity, the temperature that is governing the performance of our sonars. So in this chart, I'm just showing you a notional example on the bottom left-hand side of how the sound velocity, or the sonar, changes with the depth and temperature and salinity. And as you can see, say this is taken, I believe, up in the high north during the summer. So the top 200 meters might be a lot warmer than the rest of the water column. And potentially because of all the ice that's been melting, it has less salinity, perhaps. And what happens is the sound speed may be going too fast in this top channel. It gets trapped in the channel, and then it bounces off the surface and the next layer, and it has a very short range. So this is just an example of what's going on when the water is changing complexity so much. Oops, I don't know. Wait, let's go back. I have one more point to make in that chart. So what does this mean? Why am I telling you all about this? Well, in the bottom right chart here, I'm talking about, I have a chart that the CMRE developed a tool called the Rapid Acoustic Prediction Service, which takes the science behind sonar propagation. Sorry, I don't know why it keeps going forward like that. And then it predicts, an operator can put in, his sonar characteristics, and then he just drops it at any depth and geographical area where he is. And this gives you sort of an estimated range. So the red circles are good, the blue circles are bad. So in this particular case, you can see in the bottom right corner that the sonar loss would be great, and he would really have no chance of detecting anything at whatever depth and area that he has put that sonar. So this helps planners to optimize where to put their sonars during an exercise. And then now this chart is the final one on climate change. What we're doing about this is, well, the Arctic is changing rapidly. So we need to do something called Rapid Environmental Assessment, REA. And how we're doing that now is we're taking a glider. So this is sort of a commercial off-the-shelf glider, and it can go, for weeks or months in the water column. It goes up and down, And at some point, pre-programmed, it comes to the surface and downloads its data through a satellite. And meanwhile, we're also collecting altimetry data from the satellite, which includes things about the roughness of the ice, or the coverage of the ice, and the bottom, the depth, and the seafloor. We take these type of data and we ingest them at our center into ocean model, which we obviously is using high performance computing. And then this helps us have a digital twin of the ocean and to better understand the changing of the Arctic and help us better plan for military operations there. So I just want to summarize now what I've talked about is that there is a strategy by Allied Command Transformation accepted by NATO, and it's for warfare development up to 2040. And science and technology input is required, and if we want to keep the technological edge in these areas. Our maritime S&T program, I don't know why it keeps going forward, supports both things called critical enablers, which I've put here on the right, and warfare development imperatives. We at the center are doing and have shown collaborative, autonomous, artificial intelligence, mine countermeasures, and maritime ISR. And we're constantly working on improving them by new types of sensing, for example, quantum, by new types of artificial intelligence, also with different interoperability, STANAGs, and underwater communications. So I will now close and hand the microphone back over to you and stand by for any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam, for this perspective on the SACT vision with a very interesting focus regarding the use of the artificial intelligence, quantum technology, and about the impact of climate change on operations and especially underwater. We'll most likely come back to some of your points during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Just as a reminder, please ask all your questions in the dedicated question box at the bottom right of your screen. So after the NATO process, we will now continue with an European Union perspective with Mr. Ripoche. Mr. Ripoche, sir, if you are ready, the floor is now yours, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's also a pleasure for me to bring this European perspective after the NATO one. Well, without surprise, there will be common points, of course. Yeah, let me first come to before going to the technologies, where the naval domain stands in the so-called capability development priorities of the EU that are established in the EDA framework. There's two of those priorities out of 11 directly deal with the naval domain, and which shows the importance. And I'm not mentioning all the enablers that are in so-called cross capability enablers. So one is about naval maneuverability, and it encompasses maritime awareness, maritime surveillance awareness. One is power projection, and one is with a dedicated module, and one dedicated module is about surface superiority. And the other priority is about underwater control, and which should contribute to three modules: resilience at sea, mine warfare, here again, anti-submarine warfare, and harbor protection. As you probably all know, defense research and technology is all about supporting capability development. So what the technologies and the trends I will mention now are, of course, to support those priorities and the development of capability that will fill the possible gaps that there are in this domain. I think the first set of technologies is very much linked to the development of autonomous systems in the maritime domain, which is really a trend that we can see, that we have seen come in, and that is still under development. And of course, it's been very much driven in the past years and current years by the fight against maritime mines, which has been very much very well illustrated by the NATO presentation. So for this, what we need better communication, and better communication both above the surface and also under the surface, where it has been already showed that it's really a challenge, especially under the surface, where it's not only the acoustic waves that propagate well, but you would like to get higher rates for better exchange of information and secure comms, which is really difficult in this environment. You need those communications because what you want to do, it's not new, but you want to do collaborative engagement. All those assets that you have at sea, you want them to bring their full value and with a common picture, and also that you have specialized assets that can really bring the value on the field. And that leads us to the idea that it's not only collaborative, but swarming is the next step. And for that, the autonomy of the systems should be improved as much as possible. That's the first block of technology or technology trends that I see. Another one that I think is very important, and that where there's also a lot of attention from the European perspective, is all that's related to the energy dimension in the naval warfare. And by energy, I mean the generation, the storage, and the management of the energy. And what is maybe the trigger that made this element becoming even more important than before is probably, from our perspective, the fact that directed energy weapons are now coming to more maturity, be them lasers or high power microwaves. So there's a really an opportunity to have them now on board, but they really bring their own challenges. Whereas you still have to have all the other sensors and weapon systems and ship management systems still have to run at the same time. So energy management is really becoming even more important than before. I will just mention, not giving specific example later on, but well, in the naval domain, the domain of materials is really always important. It's a really a demanding environment, as we all know, and with I would say the renewal of the fact that high intensity warfare is back, resilience, being able to repair, with all the new functions that you want to add on the single materials, you have here a whole field of challenge. Not to mention that you still want to manage your signatures, both in the infrared domain and electromagnetic domain. So that's part of the resilience of the platform. But I will not touch a lot upon this, but it may seem as an old domain, but there's still a lot to do in the maritime environment. And of course, there's a whole lot of attention to what can be called disruptive or emerging technologies. And here I would like especially to mention the advent of quantum sensing in the area. We've already seen that for navigation purposes, in particular if the global navigation satellite systems are not available or are denied, that it would be that you can see gravimeters or inertial measurements systems with cold atoms that could probably be a solution that already demonstrated about some ships, and of course also for detections of undersea objects. There's also a lot of potential and also research on this. So that's the main technological trends that have been identified European Defence Agency framework, especially in what we call the GapTech maritime domain, which is a forum where we gather both experts from the European MODs, and there's also a lot of interaction with industry, research technology organization, and academia here. Maybe then a few words about what are the focal point and some project examples on those trends that I've just mentioned. And although EDA is not in charge of European defense funds, it's the European Commission. We also support this, and I will also mention where we can see that the European defense funds will be also supporting those technology development. And first, to start with, one thing is that one domain is underwater communication, with really a goal to get secure acoustic waveforms, explore with all the limitations of the physics what optical or electromagnetic communications could bring here, and also how then we could still develop multi-user networks even underwater. And it can be highlighted that in the work program 2022 of European Defence Funds, there is a research action on the domain of underwater warfare at large, and the topic covers methods and technologies for robust and resilient communication for an underwater system of systems. So that's really here. I think we'll see what will be the proposal in November, so very soon, and it will be really interesting to follow what can be developed in this framework, under this framework. Then swarming, as I already mentioned and was mentioned earlier also, the effort being made currently and that needs to be made is really related with increasing the autonomy of the underwater and also above surface unmanned vehicles. This is really part of also the capability development priorities, and here again, the European Defence Funds call for 2022 will cover a bit this area, since there is a topic about underwater unmanned teaming and swarms. So we'll see how those technologies that are here can be developed and applied to this. Many of those areas are there to support one concrete application that we very well know, that was mentioned in the previous presentation. That's mine sweeping, mine countermeasures in the maritime domain. And we're already starting to talk about the next generation here, and because there was really a lot of innovation in the last year. And what is done, especially in the EDA framework, is to try to get to lighter, more modular systems, and and then to get to advanced concept. And I'll mention a project in EDA here. Maybe we can relate this to also the development of, and supported by EDA, of medium-sized semi-autonomous surface vessels that can probably be part of a squad that would participate in this mission. Energy generation, storage, and management. I think it's been a lot of internal study. How the technology can be supported, how artificial intelligence and modern, in the sense of getting modern generation and management onboard system, energy onboard system can be developed, have been done. There has been a lot of mapping here, and we are really moving to the next step in EDA, trying to see how it would translate into military requirements, what it would mean in terms of architecture of the next generation of the the vessels, the ships that will be done. I mentioned quantum technology. We've been doing a lot of landscaping, also a foresight exercise to see what would be the application. And I think that one of the findings is that projects are currently mostly run at national level. I'm pretty sure that will change, since one of the added value of working at EU level is for those high risk, high reward projects is really to share the risk, but also to share the benefits when you get there. Then maybe just a few projects here. I would mention that with the support of the European Commission, EDA managed a project called Ocean 2020. It's completed. CMRE participated, and so it's also a good sign of cooperation between NATO and EU. And it really gave the opportunity to test maybe almost all of these. There were communications, there were unmanned systems cooperating with frigates, for example, and this also with two at-sea demonstrations, one in the Mediterranean in Italy and one in the Baltic Sea in Sweden. It showed all the potential and still some of the challenges that we need to solve, and gave a lot of insight and a lot of and proposals of things that still need to develop, and with the really the opportunity to get a better shared situation awareness at for the naval domain. I see that time is running. What I would say, you could probably find some of the elements on our website. What EDA provides is, as long as two member states want to cooperate, we can offer the framework. It's what we call ad hoc projects, and I can just tell you rapidly that we have such projects running almost on all those technology domains that I mentioned. One is called SALSA, on trying to develop an underwater ad hoc robust acoustic network with both moving and stationary nodes. We have one on swarming called SABU-VIS2, and it stands for Swarm of Biomimetic Underwater Vehicles, and it's really to get to the demonstration level of a swarm of autonomous underwater vehicles. As I said, minesweeping, it's been a long-standing activity at EDA, and now we are looking at the next generation, and in particular, we have a project called Modular Lightweight Minesweeping Next Generation, and I think the title says it all. That's really there. There are still a lot to do to improve the speed of minesweeping, to have better results with the difficult targets, and at the same time being even more modular and lightweight. So that's the main ones I will mention. Thank you for your attention, and I really look forward to the questions and discussion. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, for this very comprehensive overview about the European research challenges regarding the naval rearmament. In particular, the challenge of autonomous systems in the maritime sector, the underwater communication systems, the growing energy dimension in the naval warfare. And like Madame Warner, you also mentioned the growing interest and research in the quantum technology, and particularly for the navigation systems. So we will most likely come back also to these points during the Q&A session. After this very good overview of the European Union, we'll now continue with probably more an academic perspective with Mr. Nick Childs. Mr. Nick Childs, sir, if you are ready, the floor is now yours, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to speak on this distinguished panel. And also, may I express my appreciation for the excellent information and capability-rich presentations we've already had from my fellow presenters. My intention, as I think you hinted, is to perhaps step back a little bit to provide a bit of strategic context to some of the choices and requirement conundrums that are facing navies and naval leaderships and governments around the world. As we've heard, the strategic context has changed dramatically in recent times. The EURONAVAL this year is convening amid significant global sea change, not just in the strategic space, but as we've heard, in terms of rapid economic, environmental, and technological change, with the notable friction points now in terms of some of this being very much at sea. So after the Cold War, the maritime domain appeared to be an essentially uncontested, almost benign conduit for the projection of, admittedly, chiefly Western power. Now it is much more contested, as we've heard, congested and complex, and therefore the strategic and security requirements are potentially more consequential than they have been in recent times. There appears to be a greater likelihood of a confrontation between states manifesting itself at sea in the maritime arena, perhaps more so than at any time since the Cold War. This may in part be a result of the character of the domain itself. The maritime space presents room for maneuver, both literally and diplomatically, for actors to test and probe with a reasonable hope of being able to retain control of any escalation dynamics. At the same time, there is more opportunity to engage in incremental incursions on the status quo. This is true both for state and non-state actors, but also is there room for more misinterpretation and miscalculation at sea? And how does the application of some of these technologies, particularly the uninhabited and autonomous technologies, potentially aid or potentially add to the risks of these kinds of misinterpretations and miscalculations? The character of the maritime domain, the proliferation of these advanced military capabilities, continuing rapid technological change, and the evident evolution of global competition to be more regularly characterized by activities below the threshold of actual armed conflict are all combining to make strategy, mission, and capability choices for governments and naval leaders ever more challenging. The boundaries between different types of naval and maritime security missions are becoming more blurred and more difficult to define. The proliferation of even fairly modest precision weaponry is raising the bar for credible capability for naval forces, even for relatively routine maritime security tasks, perhaps most particularly in the Indo-Pacific domain. And the renewed state-based competition and revived focus on this has seen priority being placed, as we've heard, more on high-end and open ocean capabilities and the associated training and skills, not least in fleet air defense and anti-submarine warfare, with a sense that Western navies in particular have become too defensive in their posture in recent times. There is clearly a renewed focus on lethality and what that means, with an extra emphasis, again, in the Indo-Pacific region on the need for extended reach and how to achieve that. However, the more routine maritime security missions have not gone away, as we've heard. On the contrary, they are becoming less routine, in the sense that the proliferation of sea denial capabilities among both state and non-state actors are making this more challenging. This has sharpened the dilemmas, as I hinted, facing naval forces over where to focus these future investments. This is apparent not only operationally, but also in terms of deployments. And also in terms of the debates over and the challenges inherent in the need to balance levels of capability with numbers, particularly in the West, and especially among navies with long-range blue water capabilities, to integrate legacy capabilities to which novel technological advances in the realms of uninhabited and autonomous systems, quantum capabilities, are increasingly being touted as offering a solution. Yet questions surely remain over just how suitable and effective they will be across a range of requirements. The new challenges of the increasing pervasiveness of activities in the grey zone below the threshold of open armed conflict, adding new requirements, with whatever happened with the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea perhaps being an example of that. As a result, there will be a need to have increased emphasis on the ability to persistently, to rapidly, and to authoritatively monitor, identify, and attribute, and if necessary, to defend against some of these asymmetric and ambiguous threats. So for both high-end and lower-end forces, particularly those forward deployed, there will be increased emphasis on persistent and network surveillance capacities capable of rapidly disseminating high-quality data. But the proliferation of more advanced weaponry will also require, more than likely, more robust self-defense systems, complicating mission requirements. Thus, when it comes to both platforms and systems, there is a need now to redefine, I think, what is meant by the balanced fleet. What do we mean in terms of balance of systems and capabilities, even whether that remains a desirable ambition for many navies? Clearly, in this context, uninhabited and autonomous systems, whether surface, subsurface, or airborne, are set to play a significant role. They may offer many attributes including that persistence, reach, and a new way of delivering mass and numbers, and even expendability in high-intensity operations. Yet there remain questions over how they will fit into the makeup of fleets, in terms of doctrine, in terms of concepts, their suitability as weaponized platforms for certain sub-threshold scenarios, particularly on remote and isolated forward presence missions at sea, even their relative affordability and cost effectiveness for certain missions. And the challenges of all this, I think, are perhaps most vividly illustrated in, frankly, the extended and somewhat anguished debate that we have seen and that has unfolded in recent years over the appropriate future force structure for the US Navy and its sister services, the US Marine Corps and the US Coast Guard. And part of this is due to the fact that for the first time, perhaps since the Second World War, the United States is facing a potential opponent that is currently outproducing it with a more robust industrial base, at least in terms of the core of shipbuilding is concerned. It is seen in the discussions that continue to swirl here in the UK over the trajectory of the Royal Navy, currently scheduled at least to have a modest regrowth in terms of traditional platform numbers. Whether that's enough or not is again a matter of debate. However, more than that, it is the transformational agenda to leverage new technologies that is causing frictions and debate here too, in part to have superiority in the decision making and delivery of effect that we've heard about. Among the key pillars for the Royal Navy are the ambition that future procurement will embrace interchangeability by design to sustain compatibility of operations with allies. It'll prioritize autonomy, and there will be investment in data exploitation systems. But again, whether that can be delivered and will deliver the forecast results and can be delivered in time and implemented remains an open question. Among the balancing acts over the appropriate capabilities and mix are those over the high-end Type 26 frigate program, the complementary general purpose Type 31 frigates, and then what next for the Type 32 frigates? To what extent will it be chiefly a mothership for remote and autonomous systems? The new challenges of global competition at sea are also generating new patterns of activity, as I think we've heard also already this morning, as well as new operational requirements. At the high end, new sea denial capabilities and the technologies that are being fielded are generating an increased concentration of combat power with renewed focus on task group operations up to the level of complex multi-aircraft carrier formations. So what does that entail in terms of the issues around both capabilities, but also training and skill sets? In parallel, though, we have, as has been hinted, also the clear trend to disaggregate and distribute capabilities more widely, both in terms of the high-end requirements for survivability and to pose problems for opponents, but also in terms of the presence question and the issues around maintaining persistence and a broad maritime picture and a broad maritime domain awareness. In such a context, one has again to balance what the attributes will be that will make a difference in the space both of high-end warfare, but also will add greater value to relatively modest forward deployed assets in the future. Will it be increased kinetic power, for example, in the form of anti-ship missiles or less traditional upgunning of more modest platforms? Or will it be in terms of improved command and control and persistence, high endurance, intelligence, and surveillance and reconnaissance? I think we've touched on Ukraine and the Black Sea, and I think that's also being discussed in other forums as well, connected with EURONAVAL. But of course, the ripple effects of the Ukraine war, and perhaps most attention-grabbing of all, the sinking of the Russian Black Sea Fleet flagship Moskva. These events have certainly brought all this into sharper relief and added urgency to some of these issues around what it means to reset forces, particularly for potential high-end confrontation and combat at sea. And there's an added poignancy as far as the UK is concerned, because of the fact that this is also occurring in the 40th anniversary year of the Falklands conflict, which also raised some of the issues around what it means in terms of force posture at sea, and the debate, the perhaps eternal debate over the issue, at least in terms of the missile age and the onset of precision guided weapons, of the vulnerability of large surface ships at sea. This example of the Moskva in particular does appear to highlight that deadly but relatively accessible capabilities, such as commercially available or homegrown systems, are becoming more prevalent in an increasing number of operating environments, including in the littoral arena. But this will make it more challenging for navies seeking to operate forward in such areas. In the UK, the Moskva incident does, in part at least, seem to have been behind the Defense Secretary's instruction here to the Royal Navy to look again at what the right balance is between surface and subsurface capabilities, with the latter's potentially improved survivability and potency in particular, I think, being in mind here. In the United States, the Chief of Naval Operations has spoken of the Moskva incident as having prompted a new look at the issue of ship terminal defense, including the need potentially to speed up the introduction of directed energy weapons. So the Ukraine conflict is clearly also prompting that recalibration of thinking on weapon use rates, and therefore magazine depths, weapon stocks, and fundamentally the whole issue of industry-supported sustainment in high-end and high-intensity conflict. And all this has been done with a sense now of added urgency. And we've heard now, and I think this is a key factor, particularly in a technological context going forward. But perhaps the one thing that is overshadowing all of this at the moment is this question of the critical factor that is climate change. It is having a profound effect and an impact on the maritime domain, with rising sea levels and numerous other consequences for the world's oceans and the natural resources they contain, including fish stocks, and also the potential even to produce changes in maritime trade patterns, and therefore the league table of the world's strategic maritime choke points, where one would want critically to deploy, and what that means in terms of requirements. Climate change is increasing the demand signal for navies across the spectrum of operations and expanding the geographical spread of those operations. there are the challenges, as I think we've heard, of global energy transition and what that will require of navies. It presents opportunities, there's no doubt, to maintain operational advantage in potentially more harsh environments. Although climate change adaptation, I would argue, and potentially also energy transition, will also affect and potentially challenge efforts to achieve greater interchangeability between navies. I'll conclude, I think, by just broadly suggesting that the advocates of naval and maritime forces perennially cite their inherent flexibility, but as the domain itself has transformed from the essentially benign, permissive environment I spoke of earlier, this set of dramatic changes in geostrategic, geoeconomic, technological, and environmental change, the tasks that presents for strategists, policymakers, and naval leaders and planners remain daunting, I think. And differences in the sizes of navies sometimes mean responses and choices will inevitably have to be qualitatively different, particularly in terms of some capability trade-offs. But in the context of interchangeability and of alliances, that may shade the issue somewhat. And there is enough commonality anyway, and diversity, I think, for all naval forces both to contribute and potentially benefit from these shared issues as well. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for this particularly inspiring presentation on the context and the consequences of proliferation in the terms of rearmament, with all the risk, I can say, of miscalculation and that such a context can generate. So we can indeed observe on my side that modern submarine capacities are rapidly proliferating, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, and it is obviously a lot of challenges for the Western countries in the near future. So thank you, sir, for this very, very good presentation. So as a reminder, please ask all your questions, please, in the dedicated question box at the bottom right of your screen. And thank you all for your valuable and comprehensive insight and overviews during your respective presentation. So now we are perfectly on track, on time, and we can now jump in the Q&A session. I will try to meet the scheduled deadlines with an hand of this webinar at 11:30 a.m. So a few first questions are arising from the floor. I will, however, use my moderator privilege to ask the first two ones, and probably more for Madame Warner and Mr. Ripoche, because Mr. Childs was speaking quickly, but during his presentation about the energy weapons. For Mr. Ripoche and Madame Warner, could you perhaps tell us if the research on directed energy weapons or technologies are underway at the European level or the NATO level? And what are, on your side, the operational opportunities you think that this system can enable in the future? So this is my first question. The second one is about the quantum technology, because the French Ministry of the Armed Forces said by the past that the quantum technology will be the mother of all the technological breakthrough. You were speaking during your respective presentation about the quantum sensors for the mine counter warfare or for the navigation systems. But is there any other concrete research regarding some quantum weapons system at the NATO or the European level? Or is it possible for us to tell us on what horizon it seems like possible to observe such systems arriving? So I don't know who would like to answer first to these two questions. Perhaps Madame Warner, if you are ready.
Okay, thank you for the questions. I will start with the first question about directed energy weapons. I can just say this is not something that we're looking at the center. I know nations are looking at these on both aircraft and surface vessels, but in the underwater warfare, I'm not aware of it. Perhaps our other speaker could comment more on that. On quantum technology, Yes, we are using it in sensors for submarines and for mines for accurate navigation, but we're also using it for secure communications. So we have digital underwater network, and we have been working for some time on a quantum key distribution, which is a very secure method to pass messages back and forth between systems. The nations within NATO are joining to actually put an extra emphasis on quantum technologies within the Science and Technology Organization. As far as weapons, I'm not aware of weapons using this type of technology. I mean, of course, a laser or a directed energy weapon is a quantum by definition. But we're not working on anything about that here at the center. So I'll pass over to the other speaker for more information.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. Mr. Ripoche, a few additions perhaps to these questions?
Yeah, thank you. Well, also starting in the same order, I think on directed energy weapons, there are initiatives to develop high power energy laser source at EU level, and a first project that was funded by the European Commission under the Preparatory Action for Defense Research is called TALOS, and it's managed by EDA on behalf of the Commission, and will further mature the technology, although we see that at some power level it's already available. There have been demonstrations. I can see that it will go further, and one of the challenges that in the naval domain will be the integration of another system in already crowded ships with sensors and weapon system. But the benefit I can foresee, and it's really complementary with the other weapon systems for defensive purpose, at least, and especially in areas where there would be a lot of possibly unmanned systems like small UAVs with an entanglement or gray area with a lot of civil traffic, I would say. It would be interesting to have those on boards to be able maybe to really focus the effect and on a given small object or small area, rather than then resorting to guns or missiles. So that's really probably the potential here. Maybe further away in time, microwave weapons will be tested or even integrated. I see those mostly with the purpose of defending the larger platform against incoming missiles. That could be very powerful at defeating radar seekers or electronics on board the missiles, but that's really more further away in time. As for quantum technologies, I think we've mentioned the sensing. I agree that with what Dr. Warner said, that yeah, we didn't mention cybersecurity, but now it's everywhere, and the quantum key distribution is really, I think, probably the soonest application of this we can see to cybersecurity, and we see now how important it is to secure the military networks, and in the naval domain the distance between the assets, the platforms, can be quite large. So the challenge here will be exactly in this, to make sure this technology can be robust enough for a distributed large with a long distance network to support. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ripoche. Mr. Charles, do you want to add something on these 2 points?
I might just say something a little bit more on particularly the directed energy, if I may, and it's just in because both speakers have alluded to sort of this is being carried out in many cases on a national basis, and perhaps most publicly it's been seen and is very much a program as far as the US Navy is concerned. You've seen the demonstration of high-powered laser capabilities actually at sea. But it does, and the UK is also engaged in developing potential capabilities in this area. But it does pose some of the questions, particularly that the last speaker raised. That it adds a certain number of challenges, including the operation, particularly of things like high-powered lasers with huge potential ranges in crowded environments. What that means in the context of swarm threats, the dwell times of lasers, and in being able to deal with these kinds of threats also pose issues. Likewise, the power problem that was also, and the integration problem. This will demand extra power at a time when, as we've all said, climate change is generating a different set of agendas in terms of power generation and how that is done. So that interaction is critical. So in some ways, it potentially will mean what do we mean by directed energy in future? Is it in the sort of laser space, or is it microwave technologies and that sort of things? All of these, I think, present a problem. But one of the keys that these technologies are trying to solve is this trade-off between the very expensive, particularly terminal defense systems that exist now versus rather cheap potential threats, and trying to make that balance a little better going forward. I'll park quantum as I'm struggling with that myself conceptually anyway.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for these answers. Now, a lot of questions are rising from the floor. I will now pack perhaps a first pack of 3 questions and propose to our 3 panelists to answer very shortly to all of them. The first question will be perhaps more for Madame Warner and Mr. Ripoche. The drones above and under the water are being developed around the world, cheap but quite effective. Is there any research on countermeasures for the detection or counter weapons for the destruction of these drones? So this is the first question from the floor. The second one will be perhaps more from Madame Warner regarding the impact of the climate change in the anti-submarine warfare operations. Could you confirm that the ice melting will decrease submarine detection capabilities in maritime areas closer to the Arctic Ocean? And could you please confirm or deny this understanding? So the second question. And the third one, you underline, I think it was for Mr. Nick Childs, you underline that maritime activities for the patrols, the search and rescue and surveillance activities will be slowly but surely replaced by more lethal capabilities. So could you give perhaps more details about this point? So I suggest perhaps to start by Madame Warner for the 2 first questions, please.
Okay, thank you. The first question is a very, very good question on the counter AUV weapons for detection and destruction. We have not done enough in this area. We need to do more. It's very, I think, simple ways to especially in harbors to stop these vehicles, like fishing nets, things like that. We have done some testing. NATO runs unified vision every few years, which is all about detection and command and control. So we played the red team. We were not detected. And so I think we need to do more of that. So I'll just say we don't really have a robust program on this now, but it's a very good question and we need to do more of it. Climate change impact, I want to emphasize that just because the ice is melting does not necessarily mean that our capabilities for ASW are decreased. What it means is the water is constantly changing, like every day, where the warm levels are, where the less salinity levels are. So that's why we're looking at this rapid environmental assessment and this decision aids that help you plan where to put your sonar. So it doesn't necessarily decrease the capability of ASW, but it means we don't know much about the water because it's always changing, and therefore we have to optimize using this digital twins and our rapid environmental assessments on where, how deep, and where to put our sensors. And I will leave the third question for Mr. Charles. Thank you.
So yes, thank you very much, Madam. Mr. Ripoche, perhaps for the first question about the drones, if you have any answer.
Indeed, it's really, I think, well taken into account as it's really the full capability development challenge that you have to see your concept of operation, your doctrine. How will you deal with those UAVs coming, or US unmanned system coming to you? It's also we've seen this on the ground. It's also a very good example of the continuity of between security and defense, because you might be very close to the shore or even in harbor, and well, the concept of operation is maybe not exactly the same. And it comes to what Mrs. Charles has mentioned: is you need to map the potential hazards or risk to the civilian or NGOs that would be around, that you don't want, of course, to hurt when you defend yourselves. So all this is really taken into account, and so into a technical architecture. And then you need to be able to detect small objects, potentially in numbers, but at the same time there will still be high threats, high velocity things coming at you, possibly. So it's really a very broad field of requirements. And that's I think what is the challenge. So there is research. We hope to launch next year a big ad hoc projects on counter UAVs, counter unmanned system in the EDF framework. We have studies on hazard mapping. That's clearly everybody. I think it's an area where it's good to share also what are the hazards. For example, if you use a high power laser, how far away is it safe to be? So yeah, there's a lot of attention to this topic. I think it will be there, and we've already mentioned directed energy weapons. That is part of the answer, but not the only answer, for sure.
Thank you. Now the floor perhaps to Mr. Childs for the last questions about the maritime activities, replaced perhaps slowly but surely by the little capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the point I was trying to make really was that as you know, the focus has returned very much to the state-on-state competition, high-end competition, maybe confrontation. Those lower-end maritime security issues haven't gone away. On the contrary, they're evolving. They're perhaps even multiplying, but they're also evolving, and in a way that is, you know, adding to the challenge in terms of making judgment between capabilities. The proliferation, as I suggested, of relatively modest but lethal weapons in the hands not just of more states but also non-state actors at sea, and particularly in the littoral environment, is producing this challenge. And it's not just what we saw with how the fate of the Moskva in the Black Sea was decided, but also the use of anti-ship weaponry by, you know, Houthi rebels in Yemen, by some time ago now Hezbollah off the coast of Lebanon. All of that is making it much less a case of black and white between high-end and low-end maritime security. It is blurring those areas and raising the bar sometimes of what a minimum credibility, even for those missions that are constabulary, that are maritime security, need going forward. And perhaps particularly, I would say, in the Indo-Pacific region, there is this growing challenge. So that's basically what I was trying to get at, was that it's adding to the dilemmas of just where to place your judgments over just what mix of capabilities at what level you want, even at the lower end. And different navies are making slightly different judgments each time. Even dare I say it, between the French Navy on one side of the channel and the Royal Navy on another side of the channel on that level of capability.
No, thank you very much. Now I will continue with another pack of 3 questions for all the panelists. Perhaps the first one will be more for Mr. Ripoche. A question regarding the storage of hydrogen tanks. Is there any European Defense Fund research project on this topic? So the first question. The second one will be perhaps more for Mr. Childs and for Madame Warner. To which extent do you believe that Russian military onshore capabilities can deter NATO naval power to gain advantage of Russian Arctic coast in the following years in the context of ice melting? So the second one and the last one will be perhaps more for Mr. Childs. Do you think that the routine patrol missions will become slowly but surely secondary considering the current global context in the world? So I will give the floor perhaps first to Mr. Ripoche for the questions about the hydrogen tanks.
I'm not aware that there is a dedicated call for specifically looking at hydrogen for as an energy solution for naval platform, but I think the way the energy.
We don't hear you anymore, Mr. Ripoche. Fred, did you close your mic?
Can you hear me now? No? Yeah? Okay. So what I was saying is that I'm not aware that there is a specific call for really dedicated to hydrogen storage on naval platform incoming, but the way the energy issue is tackled is really globally and looking at everything, including, of course, fuel cells. There are environmental reasons to look at that, and then also it might be a good solution. As we all know, then especially on military ships, safety and security is really an high-end requirement. So that would probably be a challenge, but there are solutions, and it's also studied for ground land platforms. So definitely hydrogen is also in the landscape as a candidate solution, but probably it will be a mix of all. It has been said. If you take the example of the directed energy weapons, it's usually a peak power that you need at a given time, and at the same time you don't want to become blind because you fire your laser, so all your sensors still need to go, and of course all your ship system still need to go. So that's the kind of challenge. How do you manage peak power and all the other operations at the same time? So that it will be a really complex and distributed solution. I don't think there's one solution, one technology that will solve all the issues.
Thank you very much, sir. The second question for us more for Mr. Childs and Madame Warner. Mr. Childs, if you want to start about the Russian military onshore capabilities.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think in the context of lessons that are being learned out of Ukraine, and frankly, as far as a lot of analysts are concerned, the underperformance of the Russian military machine in lots of respects, and clearly that's going to have an impact on calculations going forward. But there are an awful lot of elements that haven't been fully on show, shall we say, and potentially present problems into the future. And I think the anti-access area denial capabilities that the Russian armed forces have from the shore and at sea, but in the littoral, that can have an effect. I think will very much be there, potentially more potent, but we don't know, because we cannot fully judge whether the performance that we've seen translates over to those capabilities as well. But in I think the particular context was the Arctic, and I think there actually in the long term that fundamentally will become a more contested and critical area, because it will be more of more significance to Russia. It is where a lot of their residual capabilities will remain, but it's also one where, for various reasons to do with geostrategic changes, not least the advent of Sweden and Finland potentially into the NATO alliance, will make Russia feel more vulnerable, even in that area. So all of those things, I think, add up to it becoming a more critical area, and one where the NATO alliance will have to have a critical look at what it needs to do to sustain its interests, maintain deterrence, but not add to the risks of miscalculation. Shall I just also address the patrol question as well while I've got the floor?
Yes, please, sir.
Yes, on that. From my perspective, the patrol mission will not go away. It'll just become less routine going forward. In fact, far from going away. On the contrary, in the context in which opponents, whether it's particularly China, potential opponents, particularly China or Russia, are finding different ways to compete and potentially to confront and potentially to change the status quo below the threshold of conflict. In a world in which the information space will be vitally important, the ability to persistently monitor and if necessary, potentially identify and attribute challenges to the status quo, challenges to the rules-based international order will grow, but it will mean in significant further investment, both in new technologies and perhaps where you are forward deploying platforms that need some potential form of protection in order to sustain deterrence. You'll need to look at whether you need to raise the capabilities generally of those platforms too.
Yeah, thank you very much. For Madam Warner, do we have any additions to the second questions?
Sure, I just will make a comment on the Arctic. I didn't put a critical slide in my briefing that shows the extent of the ice melt in the polar regions. And the reason this is important, it's a huge difference in the transit time for shipping. So right now we have the Northwest Passage, which goes through the Canadian side. And for many months during the year now, there's another passage that goes through the Russian EEZ. Eventually, there will also be straight over the top so that there will be no ice at the pole, maybe 2040, 2050, for just a few months a year, but still the significant advantage for shipping to be able to go through that area. So that's why it's super important, and also including the number of resources that are believed to be on the seabed there. I will say that NATO has no policy right now in the Arctic. There's 8 countries that are on the Arctic Council, including Russia. When Sweden and Finland join NATO, 7 of 8 will be NATO countries. But so far, this Arctic Council has no security types of enforcement. They're all in a collaborative manner. And it's everything about the Arctic has been between these 8 countries in a collaborative dialogue type manner. And since 24 February, the invasion of Ukraine, they have stopped. So there's no communications right now between the 7 other nations and Russia. So Russia, as you know, is reinvigorating their North Fleet. They have many bases that they're opening in that area. So it is a very important area for NATO to be considering what their deterrence posture is going to be. I can't say right now that that they will completely be deferred, but I think that NATO will have a deterrence policy for the area. We just don't have one now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. Thank you very much. So the time is running, so I will now take only a pack of 2 last questions. The first one will be perhaps more for Mr. Childs. Do you think the supply of naval platforms to Canada and Australia by UK will lead to occasional participations of these last 2 countries in carrier deployment in the future, like in the Indo-Pacific? The second question will be perhaps more for Mr. Ripoche. How do you explain the delay taken by the European Union in the drone capacity in almost all the dimensions? And do you think the European Union will be able to catch up with many other navies in the near future? So I will start with Mr. Childs, please, for the questions about the carrier deployment between UK, Canada, and Australia.
Thank you. Yes, and that is, I think, a very significant set of procurements, as the questioner implies. The base sort of Type 26 platform that is not only the UK's kind of high-end anti-submarine warfare platform, but has also been adopted by Australia and Canada, essentially because the world came round in a circle to the kinds of capabilities that the Type 26, which has been on the market, dare I say, for a long time, but not gaining traction. The world changed and came towards the high-end capabilities that the Type 26 represents. It is interesting in the context of different perceptions, as I hinted earlier, that different navies are and judgments they're making about what levels of capabilities and what types of capabilities they want, depending on what the neighborhood is to a large extent. For Australia, for example, and for Canada, their different versions of essentially the same design have significant differences with some significant different priorities. But yes, these platforms were clearly procured specifically for high-end capabilities to deliver those both for the national fleets, but absolutely to integrate more into the kind of task group operations that I also mentioned are becoming the norm again to a significant extent. Carrier operations, definitely integrating into those, whether they would be UK carrier operations routinely in the Indo-Pacific. I think that there was obviously a high profile one last year to roll out the new capability again, but that will be a challenge for the UK going forward as well. In that context, multinational carrier task forces may be the answer for all kinds of medium-sized navies, as well as the US Navy, in order to sustain the credibility of those kinds of capabilities and task forces going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ripoche, perhaps for a second question.
I think it's maybe too broad a statement. I'm not sure EU is lagging on all domains of unmanned systems. There are some, but especially in the naval domain and in the mine countermeasure warfare, I think there's a lot of offer from the European industry, and Navy is also taking on board the challenge of putting this into operation, which is a huge change. So probably it has to be seen domain by domain. I can see the trend that most of the navies want to have unmanned assets on board, including aerial system, to improve the awareness, situational awareness, and cooperation is really a key requirement. And at the same time, as I said, I see a lot of a vibrant EU industry at large, not only EU, of course, but also EU industry that can provide solutions. So and that is working on solutions for the future. So I don't see as this as a lost race, and I really think that it has been said more and more in the future, the balanced fleet will be a mix of unmanned and manned platforms, and you have to find the right mix, the right concept of operation. It has to be robust and prove added value, but yeah, it's in the making.
Thank you very much. So I think this is a time to conclude very soon. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. Thank you for all the three panelists for your respective answer for these questions. But before concluding, however, I would like to perhaps give to our three panelists a last opportunity to conclude with a few words on what they consider to be perhaps the main issues, challenges, risks of naval rearmament and proliferation in the coming years or decades. So if you can answer very shortly, each of you, perhaps Madame Warner to start, if I may.
Okay, sorry. Okay, quickly, I think obviously that our future fleets are going to be manned and unmanned, and therefore the biggest challenge is going to be having this a multi-domain command and control from the unmanned systems that are underwater to the manned systems that are underwater to the surface and the air and the space. So for me, definitely command, control, communications between manned and unmanned systems in multi-domains. I think that's a challenge going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ripoche, please, in a few words.
Thank you. Now, definitely agree on this last statement, and maybe to add on a different dimension. I think maritime domain has also yet to make to tap into the full potential of innovation and dual-use technologies. And there is a lot that is done also in the civilian domain, and that can be translated, adapted to the military domain. And another point on a different dimension, and energy transition will bring on its own additional challenges. And the example I would like to mention is, for example, the protection of energy infrastructures like windmill farms at sea will become also a question to tackle with. And we have just launched a project with the support of the European Commission to address the cohabitation of renewable energy sources offshore and defense. And I think that will be really a question when you look at what you need in the energy mix in the future also. So yeah, thanks again, and that will be my 2 points to enlarge a bit the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Ripoche. Mr. Chai, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Just I think 3 brief points, one of which is in terms of risks going forward. I think one of the keys is that despite all the wargaming and the intellectual heft that have been put into trying to conceptualize the future of maritime confrontation at sea, we're all essentially theorists because there has not been this kind of level of confrontation really in the missile age. So that represents a challenge in and of itself. I think it is true that particularly the remote and uninhabited space represents huge potential in the maritime domain. The maritime domain is also, I would argue, one where it is perhaps behind the curve compared to the others in terms of being able to grip some of those potentials and actually deliver capabilities. But that, I think, will change over time. I think perhaps the fundamental one going forward is in terms of this mix of manned and unmanned systems as being the right balance going forward in order to deliver full spectrum capabilities, and particularly a sustained capability and the ability to sustain operations at high level. The only way that this is going to be achieved by anyone going forward will be in a multilateral context and in terms of integration and cooperation. So the kinds of things that we've heard from my other fellow panelists are clearly going to be critical going forward in terms of delivering on those capabilities.
So Yes, thank you so much, everyone. It remains for me now to conclude by warmly thanking our three panelists for their respective analysis and overviews about the current situation of the naval rearmament, of the proliferation, but also our audience for all the questions. I'm sorry if I forgot some of them during the Q&A session. So thank you for all for your participations, and I really I hope that you enjoyed this webinar as I did, and I really hope now a very good day to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.